Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, it's working. It's great to see you all here at the SPA in Amsterdam. And I also would like to welcome everyone who's watching our live stream. And I'm welcoming you on behalf of SPA 25, but also ISVB Uitgevers en Uitgeverij Noordboek. And we've gathered here today to actually welcome a super interesting guest speaker who came all the way from Australia. That's Professor Dr. Glenn E. Albrecht. Really pleased to have you here. Thank you. And he is actually here because there's been a Dutch translation of his influential book called Earth Emotions. That's now been published by Uitgeverij Noordboek as Aarde-emoties with Joris Kapenbergs. He translated this. And both books, both the English one and the Dutch one, will be for sale after the event. My name is Jetske Brouwer. I will be your moderator tonight, or this afternoon, really. And I'll just shortly introduce the topic of this event. So, as I say, we're here to hear some more about Earth emotions, aarde-emoties. And this is a work that is about the present predicament, I'd say, the predicament of climate breakdown, global biodiversity loss, but it has this specific perspective because Professor Albrecht thinks we need to attend more to actually our mental and psychic states of this context. So maybe this applies to some of you too, but quite a lot of people, I guess worldwide, experience emotions such as eco-anxiety or fear of what the future may hold in terms of all these natural transformations or actually natural devastation. And according to Professor Albrecht, if I say this correctly, it is high time to actually develop a new vocabulary, both for these more negative emotions, to really understand what is going on with ourselves as well, but also maybe some new words to cultivate new emotional states, more positive states, in order to come into this whole new era. Because the era we are in now, we all know to be the Anthropocene, the age of human dominance, in which we actually witness quite a devastation of life on Earth. But Mr. Albrecht says that there is actually another way of relating to our Earth, and if we get there, we may enter the Symbiocene. And there is quite a lot of words in this book to describe that world, but also maybe to get there even. And some of you may know the word solastalgia, which is a word Mr. Albrecht coined about 20 years ago, and that has now been translated as solastalgie or troostwee in Dutch. And this is a word that actually describes a sense of missing, really. We miss something that was in our natural surroundings, that was really dear to us, and that has vanished. And I think we will hear more about solastalgia, but also about all these new fascinating concepts just in a few moments. And before inviting Mr. Albrecht to the stage, I would just like to say that after his lecture, he and I will speak some more about some issues, but you are very much welcomed to then pose your own questions during the Q&A. So if you have any questions during the lecture, please write them down, remember them, and join our conversation. So without further ado, then a warm welcome to Glenn Albrecht.
Thank you very much, and a lovely introduction. I much appreciate it. And it's great to be here. I feel deeply honoured to be in the space with the people in Amsterdam and the Netherlands generally who are interested enough in this project of Earth Emotions to be here and to listen to me live. The world's most isolated philosopher lives in the bush in Australia and never talks to anyone except kangaroos and wallabies and koalas and things. So I've had the joy of being open and being able to speak to my fellow inhabitants of the Symbiocene because I know that you're already in it, and that's why you're here. So it is a real privilege to be able to do something other than Zoom. It's a real privilege to be able to interact with people who are interested in what I'm trying to do. And hopefully in the short time that I have available, I can begin to do a quick summary of the book, Earth Emotions, with a few diversions, and hopefully you'll get a pretty good idea of what it is that I'm trying to do. So obviously we deal with the issue of Earth Emotions, both positive and negative in the book, and that's one of the contributions that I hope you can remember, is that it's not all about doomsayers and doomsaying. It's about the transition from that language and that world to a different one which reconnects us to our positive earth emotions. So I grew up as a nature lover, a bird lover. I still am a bird lover. That's my bird totem. I consider it to be my friend, and I first interacted with it when I was about 5. And I thought it must love me because it stayed close to me and twittered it over my head. And I thought, this bird loves me. It must be special. I found out as an adult that all it does is use you as a human broom, because as you move, you disturb insects, and that's what it's after. It's not after you at all. So you're like an inanimate object that it doesn't particularly care about. But I fell in love with it at the age of 5, and I, despite learning the truth, which was hard, I'm still happy that I have this special bird in my life. But it explains to you briefly that I have a biography, which I call a symbiography, which you'll find out about if you read the book. The special relationships that I have with animals, plants, and special humans, like my grandmother and my mother, that were central to my love of nature and my love of life. And that explains in part why I write the book. The book was written because my love of nature was being assaulted by a world that was heading rapidly in the opposite direction. I grew up in Perth in Western Australia, which is one of the most isolated parts of the world. Perth is the most isolated capital city in the world. Western Australia has the highest degree of endemism, or plants and animals that can only be found in that part of the world. So when you grow up in that part of the world and you realise how special, where the word unique actually means something quite specific, like unique, the whole place generates a feeling of great emotional oneness with the environment around you. And it is special because obviously it can't be found anywhere else on Earth. And then when you leave it, or it starts being developed, in inverted commas, you suddenly realise that this is a really important part of your own life. And so the book arises out of that growing up in Western Australia, moving to the east coast of Australia, having to reconnect to some notion of life and nature on the other side of the continent of Australia. But it takes 4.5 days to go from one side to the other by car. So it's not like just going to Belgium. It's like going to another world. So that story is told in Earth Emotions, and it sets the scene for how I think about the Anthropocene and why I want it, even if the geologists are unhappy with it. I'm unhappy with it as well. I'd rather it disappear tomorrow if possible. So that's my vision of the Anthropocene. It's the Upper Hunter of New South Wales. It's the open-cut coal mining centre of the Southern Hemisphere. It's connected to massive power stations. It's connected to the port of Newcastle, which exports more black coal than any other port in the world. So we're talking about something that can be seen from space. If you look at Google Earth, you can see over 500 square kilometres of actively terraformed land, where it's visible that the land has been scarred. It's not just a cut. The open cut implies that you cut into the earth. It's an expanse that's been absolutely desolated by the impact of huge-scale mining. That's one of the bigger mines in the foreground. In the background is one of the largest coal-fired power stations in the Southern Hemisphere. I had to take a photo through a fence, which is why you get that grainy appeal appearance. It's not just because I'm a sort of arty-farty photographer. It's because there was a really big fence there, and you have to take the photo quickly, otherwise the security guards come and take you away. Or they'll take your cameras or your film away. So it's a really difficult place to view. But if you wanted to visit me and you wanted to know about the Anthropocene, I'd take you there and tell you that that is the Anthropocene, as far as I'm concerned. It's the most extreme example of the ruination of this planet that I can possibly imagine. So how do I go from that to thinking about solastalgia, and other negative earth emotions? Well, it was pretty easy. My gut reaction to what was going on in the Upper Hunter was one of complete and utter dismay and disgust. It sort of violated my whole sense of being, that this land was once owned and occupied, or owned is probably not the right word, by the Wonnarua people, who are the indigenous people of that part of Australia. And they were there for tens of thousands of years. When the Europeans arrived in 1788, it was the first observers of this region described it as the Tuscany of the South, where Tuscany was being held up as the model of the most beautiful landscape in Europe. To convert it from what the Wonnarua understood and experienced over tens of thousands of years, and what the early European settlers described as paradise on earth. From about the 1970s onwards, this large-scale open-cut coal mining had turned this place of abundance and beauty into a moonscape. And so it violated my sense of being and my sense of place that this had happened. And I realised that other people must be feeling much the same as I am, and particularly those people that have to live next door to the neighbour from hell, the coal mine, the power station, the railway lines, the trucks, the dust, the noise, the lights at night. You couldn't experience that without some impact on your sense of place and your sense of well-being. And that's the origin of solastalgia. It came from my own emotional reaction to what was happening on this landscape. And when I started studying about, are there ways that this has been explained and written about in the literature in the past? And the closest I got to at that time was Nostalgia from Hoffer, and 1688. Nostalgia was described as a medical condition that could kill you. It was mostly afflicting soldiers fighting on foreign shores. Its nostos means to return home. Algia means pain, sorrow, grief. It doesn't just mean pain in a biomedical sense. And so this nostalgia that Hoffer had diagnosed could be cured. All you had to do is be returned home, repatriated. In the case of solastalgia, the solace and the word solace is part of its construction. The word desolation is part of its construction. The algia is definitely from the Hoffer and biomedical literature on pain. But in particular, what I wanted to emphasise was the radical difference between a pain that comes from inside you when you're away from home and your mental landscape is being disturbed, and the solution to that is to go home, and the pain you experience when your own home is being desolated and destroyed by forces beyond your control, and your mental landscape is being disturbed by that change in your structural environment, in that which is outside of you. And so I define solastalgia as the homesickness you have when you're still at home, but your home's leaving you. So it's a similar feeling to the traditionally defined nostalgia, but it's the opposite situation. You can't go home to solve your distress, your melancholia, because you're already there. And it applies obviously to other circumstances than mining. The climate change, climate chaos story is one of your home leaving you every year. you'd have to go further north or south of the equator to remain within your home climate. And obviously the temperature changes, the sea level changes, and I won't go into the story of the biophysical impacts of climate change. You know them probably better than I do. The situation we're in with respect to solastalgia now is that it's a pandemic. We're seeing the expansion of the distress caused by these negative changes to your loved home environments worldwide. And so my work, I'm a bit gravelly today because I've been talking a lot. My work is to get rid of solastalgia. Having invented it in 2003, my greatest achievement in life will be to kill it and to make sure that it's taken out of the dictionary by at least 2050 because it's no longer relevant. It's become redundant. Now, the others are either created by me or are in the literature and have been for some time. I don't have time to go through them in detail. The book attempts to give half-decent summaries of them. I created Global Dread because solastalgia is a lived experience of the present. Dread in English is definitionally connected to the future. So this feeling of intense distress about what the future holds is something that I felt we needed in our language. But one of the unfortunate things that we now have is that there's now a slew of new concepts, mainly connected to the notion of grief, that are applied to our relationship to the earth and in particular the climate. So it means that this is work that's still in progress. We're adding to the list of negative states that we feel psychologically and emotionally. And that's a terrible situation to be in. So if I wanted to make my next million, not that I've ever made one, I could write a book that really gets into the desolation, the negative states. It seems like the disaster sells well. And if you can add to the literature on the disaster, you're guaranteed a place in history. So that's the story. I believe that we are not out of the adding to this list of negative emotional states connected to the state of the earth. I call them psychoterratic states. Psycho means of the mind, or the psyche. Terratic means of the earth. And this is a list of negative psychoterratic conditions. And I have to go that way. So that just gives you an idea, and I'll use my little red thing because I've got it in my hand and it gives me a sense of power. This mine here is in the Upper Hunter, and that space between the top and the bottom is approximately 2 kilometres. This is in 2008. It's now doubled in size. The mine is 0.5 kilometre deep, and that machine there is the world's largest machine for removing the earth and disturbing the earth and digging. It's called an electric shovel or dragline. So that gives you an idea why solastalgia was an important concept for me and why studying the neighbours that live next to this kind of insult to the earth were the people I wanted to learn from. I interviewed many people. With colleagues, we interviewed well over a few hundred citizens that were living next to these coal mines, just to see if our feeling of our violation was being matched by those that actually lived there. This is an Indigenous man who drove hundreds of unnecessary kilometres in order not to see the impact of mining on his home territory, or country as it's called. So that gives you an idea of how strong that feeling is, because if you want to avoid something which upsets you so much that you're willing to drive hundreds of kilometres in order not to go past it, that's a pretty powerful earth emotion. And of course, Indigenous people have now been colonised twice in Australia, once by the Europeans in 1788 and now by multinational coal miners in the 20th century. So this double colonisation leads to a level of distress that many of us cannot comprehend. And you can see in the slide picture that I got a grant, got a helicopter, went up and took photos of mines. You're not normally allowed to look at them, but they can't stop you if you're coming in from the air. 2008, drones didn't exist. And solastalgia has now been taken up as a concept worldwide, not just in academic contexts, but in art, literature, music, and the whole range of human creativity as a response to what's going wrong. Kate McDowell produced this porcelain piece in, I think it was 2012 or thereabouts, for an article, 2010, but it was for an article in the New York Times, and she named the piece Solastalgia. The article was written about the expansion of the domain of ecopsychology and the idea of an ecological unconscious becoming conscious at that time. So artists do respond in ways that are very powerful, and the role of art and artists in questioning what's going on reveals an aspect of solastalgia that I think is important, and that is that if you feel solastalgia, you feel its opposite as well. It means that's a springboard out of despair into its opposite, its repair. And that's where the Symbiocene comes. That's Fluffy Years at Wallaby Farm in New South Wales. My wife and I have lived there for 10 years, and we've just moved. I feel a sense of nostalgia, genuine nostalgia for the loss of Fluffy Years in my life, the most beautiful koala in the world. But what it does is it reminds me to say something about the opposite of the Anthropocene. The koala lives in Australian eucalypt forests because it eats eucalyptus leaves. The only way it can eat them and digest them is because its microbiome, it consists of bacteria that just love converting eucalyptus leaves into something that koalas can live on. When the koala drops its eucalyptus bombs onto the floor of the forest, there's a particular moth that eats the koala poo and converts it into nutrients that feed the eucalyptus. It keeps the eucalyptus forest healthy. We have a healthy ecosystem when we have healthy koalas. But the whole system relies on bacteria that are in the guts of the second cecum, it's got two, of koalas. And so living with wild koalas makes you realise that this system, this interconnection, is so profound that if we ignore it, it's probably a major cause of our demise as a thinking species, but also our biophysical presence. So if symbiosis is now so evident and so important as a concept, where did it come from? And I'll briefly go through the main phases of what I think are needed to be understood in order to understand the importance of this concept. If I want to convince you that we need to be in the Symbiocene, if that's needed, I need to convince you that symbiosis, the basis of the concept of the Symbiocene, is a powerful enough base on which to build something like a proposal for a new era. So, of course, it comes from the Greeks, and the Greeks used this concept to describe not only biological companion relationships, but also human social relationships. So it was always a very versatile term. The idea of symbiosis, there's a lot of complexity in the translation and transliteration. And I don't have time to get into the details of that tonight, so if there are any linguists here and people that know more about Greek than I do, I don't want to talk to you. It's just impossible. The biological context, Aristotle and others wrote about symbiosis in the animal world. The two classic examples that are used to illustrate it, one was the pinna shell and the crab. The story is that the little crab lives inside the shell. When fish swim accidentally into the inside of the shell, it's a very large shell, the crab pinches the inside of the shell, it goes ouch and closes, and then they both feed on the fish. The crab has eyes, the shell has the trap, and they work together and they both feed at the same table. And the other illustration is the famous plover that takes the the leeches out of the gums of crocodiles on the Nile. The crocodile gets free dental care, and the plover gets a blood-filled leech as its reward. Symbiosis in biology. And in the social context, it's all about companionship between humans in various levels of intensity. It could be friendship and companionship at one level. It could be sexual intercourse and marriage at another. But the word symbiosis was used in that context without any connection to it being a biological issue, not human. It could be biological with respect to intercourse and sex, and very human. So it's the idea of symbiosis then is both social and biological. The idea of the coming together of unlike parties in a union and in companionship as a united unit is what it meant. And then it disappears into the ether for a while and comes back as the commons, with early English translations applied to, for example, Misselden's 1622 account of the need for patents in commerce, as opposed and the private rights that come with those patents, as opposed to the public good. And he refers to that as the public symbiosis. And that's one of the few instances that you can find of the use of that word at that time. The Dutch origins, I didn't just put this in because I was speaking to a Dutch audience, although I was tempted, but I actually found it fascinating that Van Leeuwenhoek, sorry about the pronunciation, was one of the first to experiment on himself to observe symbiosis. What he did is he scraped the gunk off around his teeth and put it under his brand new U-Butte microscope and discovered that the microbiome of the mouth. And he was the first person on the planet to observe the bacterial colony that lives in our mouth, and we now call it the mouth microbiome. But imagine the surprise you would have if you scrape your teeth and get a bit of white gunk off it. Hopefully it's white. In my case, it'd be red from the red wine. And you discover that it's alive and it's a soup of life. And that was just the beginnings then of how we now understand microbial life, and it being the source of symbiosis at the base of life. Everything comes from the micro and builds and evolves towards the macro. And I discovered also Miriam, her work on the metamorphosis of insects, overturning Francisco Reidi's spontaneous generation and stuff that had been accepted as truth for a long time. A very observant woman and a very talented woman wrote about false changes when she discovered that sometimes when a chrysalis opens, you don't get a moth or a butterfly. What you get is a colony of wasps. And she called it false changes, and of course it's describing parasitism. A wasp has laid its eggs inside the caterpillar as it's beginning to pupate. The wasp larvae eat the caterpillar as it's trying to evolve into a butterfly, and then at the end the caterpillar is gone, the wasps are ready to come out, and you get parasitic symbiosis. So yes, her work on the insects of Suriname, her artwork, her contribution to science is something that I'm sure you in the Netherlands know more about than people do in Australia, but it's an example of we're now discovering anew some of the things and some of the people that contributed to this knowledge base. Okay, the German scientists that were studying lichen realised that we had here an association between algae and fungi where 1 + 1 = 3. And this is not normal in science, and it's not normal in logic. The 3 means that this new unit has got properties that are not held by either of the parts. And so the discovery of lichen just overturned the notion of the integrity and unity or purity of species. And that's the beginning of a revolution which is still occurring today through the work of people like Lynn Margulis, now sadly deceased. But I want you to think that this is not a discovery, if you like, it's a continuation of what the Greeks and others were observing. But what's new is that we call symbiosis an association or relationship between unlike parties that create new properties, new qualities, new organs, new species. It becomes a factor in evolution that someone like Lynn Margulis was able to emphasise in the 20th century. We don't just have evolution and change by Darwinian evolutionary, nature, red in tooth and claw and all the rest of it. It can happen through cooperation as well. So Anton de Barry used the word symbiosis in its current transliteration to describe this new type of companionship that was being discovered. I won't even say anything about that. Of course, there are others who are not scientists, people like Prince Kropotkin, the so-called anarchist, who was talking about mutual aid between species before we discover more about the relationship between plants and the mycorrhizome, the wood wide web and other things that we can now associate with symbiosis on a grand scale. So he was arguing that at the very least, mutual aid or cooperation between species is just as important as competition. So this was the foundation of what I would consider to be a revolution in the way that we think about life. People like René Dubois and now many others have taken the base of this change in the way we view life to project into a philosophy of life, a philosophy of how we can take the knowledge that we've discovered about symbiosis into the realm of politics, ethics, culture, society in general, art, all creative endeavours. So what he's saying is that this discovery in biology transcends biological and scientific domains and takes us into wherever else we wish to go. And that's where I wish to go. It's where the Symbiocene will take us. So there's a list there of people that I consider to be important in the whole history of the 20th century and now the 21st century evolution of the concept of symbiosis. It's well established scientifically. It's now being hugely and widely discussed by intellectuals and creatives all over the world in multiple languages. So it's no longer something that I need to defend or even deflect criticism. It's a solid base with a science, capital S, foundation that's now able to be used in a million different contexts. And just briefly, in the spirit of Miriam, I want to mention Eileen Mitchell, who influenced my thinking on symbiosis. But she wrote in 1946, and tell me of another person who at that time in any language was saying that we need to bring our current way of life into symbiosis with the rest of life. And she was writing in Australia about the destruction of the soil, the clearing of forests, the removal of Aboriginal people, because she saw that Aboriginal people did have a symbiotic relationship to their country. And so if you start doing this research, you can find all sorts of people that had brilliant, prescient ideas about symbiosis long before the 20th century, long before the 21st century. Sorry. And it gets even weirder, you know, if French post-structuralism is connected to pseudo-copulation between orchids and wasps, discovered by an Australian woman in 1928. And now we get, 1,000 plateaus talking about deterritorialization and territorialization based around the story of the orchid and the wasp. If you read your Deleuze, you'll know all about it. I can't read that quote because I can't read French post-structuralism in English, so that puts me out of the equation. But what I'm trying to convey to you is that symbiosis, the discoveries in science, flow through quite seamlessly into philosophy and some of the most critical and interesting and complex thinking that we have coming out of continental Europe and hopefully other parts of the world. And so, yes, all this is revolutionary. We discover that we're more than human. We always have been. There's about 1 trillion viruses, bacteria, fungi living inside us. We are holobionts. We're not a single separate species. We interact with other holobionts. This room has now become a super holobiont because you're all breathing, farting, and sharing your microbiome with others. So it's definitely a different worldview than the one that was more comfortable, which was that we're isolated egos, isolated atoms, isolated bodies, and we live in a Newtonian world of billiard balls just smacking into each other. It's gone. It's completely and utterly fabricated. It's no longer considered to be science. It's now ideology. And so that's an important thing to remember as well. And that gets me to the Symbiocene. How much time do we have left? Right. So I don't think I need to mount the case any further that we need to move from the Anthropocene to a period in our history where we reconnect symbiotically with the rest of life. Did we take a wrong turn at Albuquerque? Yes. It was the Industrial Revolution. It was the use of fossil fuels. And it was the impact of symbiotic busting activity on this planet that has caused the situation to where we are right now. We are at crisis point because we've ignored symbiosis as a factor in the evolution of life. And we did so largely because it was invisible to us. We were happy with the big church, the big tree, the big powerful man. But it turns out that the most important things in life are the tiniest that we couldn't see until the telescope, until the microscope. And so what I'm suggesting is that this movement from the Newtonian, rigid, mechanistic world to the organic, symbiotic world is one that is fully supported by my reading of science. Plus, you get a different emotional choreography that goes with it. Biophilia from and E.O. Wilson, The Love of Life. There's lots of philias there, not all of them are mine. I've created Eutieria, that oceanic feeling that you get when you're at one with life and the surroundings. There's more to all this, and I've had to create some of these words because in English we didn't have them. We just took for granted that we could have them if we wanted to. We feel happy going to the ocean. Go to the ocean now in Australia, you've got plastic washing up, dead birds with fishing line around their necks, oil-soaked marine animals. So we're in trouble. I want the positive psychoterratic to be associated with the rise of the Symbiocene and the collapse and decline of the Anthropocene. I can't wait. I won't say anything about that because I don't have time. So I'll argue briefly that this will also be a new geological era. Crawford Lake in Ontario was where you were supposed to find the layers that define the Anthropocene as a distinct layer in separating us from the Holocene. Well, in 50 years' time, you'll go to Crawford Lake and you'll go looking for pollution in the top layer of mud, and there won't be any. It's because we've moved into the Symbiocene and we're no longer producing anything that can't be assimilated into the rest of life. And so that's the geological proof that we've actually made the practical and hopefully the emotional change that we need. So everything changes. Again, I don't have time to deal with all this. And the new language I'm developing is to replace useless words with ones that I think are worthwhile. Some of them are going to be really challenging. Like just a few weeks ago, I created the symbonomy to replace the economy, because the economy and oikos are now part of the problem. They're not a word. It's not even a combination of words that we want to use any longer. The Gedeist, May the Geist be with you. It's a secular spirituality that connects you to the rest of life. Want to know more? The Dutch edition of Earth Emotions can help you. It's practical. A Dutch engineer and designer just created a mycelium-based coffin. I put an order in for one already. It's not that I want to die, but that's the way I want to go. Mycelium-based furniture, mycelium-based bricks for housing, mycelium-based clothing, leather that comes from living processes, packaging, you name it. We can now begin to think of replacing everything that's toxic with its opposite. And indeed, that's what we have to do for the whole of the Symbiocene. Think of something in the Anthropocene. Actually, we want to get rid of that. But what's its opposite? Can we do this? It's not just emotional opposites, it's material opposites as well. And just in case you think that I'm utopian, I am. But it's spelt E-utopia, not Thomas More's utopia, which is a place that can't exist in the future. That's how it's defined. U means no place. Topia means place. So I am a utopian, but not the type that you think I am. So that's hopefully cut off a few lines of criticism already. The detail on that, think of something in the Anthropocene and then think of its opposite. And then you're on the way to being in it. And once you're in it, you can't get out. I also talk about generation Symbiocene, which is my contribution to the future. Obviously, it's a future-orientated meme, but I'm also a person that's deeply interested in how young people especially can see a future for themselves that's worth having and worth being in, that's worth actually creating. And so there's a 90-year-old woman on the top of that coal train as well, part of Rising Tide, similar to Extinction Rebellion in the city of Newcastle. And so I'm closely aligned with what they do. They get arrested, I theorise. I feel guilty about that, but if a 90-year-old can get arrested on top of a coal train full of coal, I take my hat off to them. I work and walk with my own grandchildren in Newcastle on school strike for climate change. So it's one of those things where we need to have participation as well as theory. And, you know, we can have the Anthropocene for a while, but then everything goes foot. Or we could have the Symbiocene where indefinitely into the future we can build something which I think could be truly amazing, wonderful and enjoyable. And that's one of the other things that I'd like to conclude with, that the Anthropocene and its captains have taken the enjoyment of life away from us. The Symbiocene will give it back to you. So I hope you find that a compelling argument. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. That was really interesting, thought-provoking and funny at times, I would say. Before I will pose some questions to you, I would like to actually invite you, the audience, to maybe ponder a bit upon that very first concept I think you mentioned, the symbiography. So maybe think about to what extent that concept resonates. So to what extent your natural surroundings, possibly in your youth or maybe just now, actually really influence who you are as a person. And then maybe some of you can share their thoughts in a few moments. That would be nice, I'd say. But now it's my time to ask some questions. And I guess the first ones are a bit about discourse and language, because obviously that's a grand perspective in the book. And first, I think I would be interested to hear you say some more about the philosophical domains you are in. I feel like it's both epistemology, but also it has a political aim, but also a lot of discourse. And what then I would say is the line of thought. Do we need new concepts to cultivate new emotions, to have new political realities? Is this like a linear process? Could you say something?
Chaotic.
It's chaotic, okay.
But it is a process.
Maybe that might give it up.
It is a process, you're quite right. Why new words? There are multiple answers to that. One of them is that the words we're currently using are useless. They've been used and abused and absorbed into the black hole of late capitalism, and I'll call it that because I want it to end very soon. And I use it as a descriptive term, not as an evaluative term. It's capitalism. So sustainability. I used to be a professor of sustainability. I did my best. I worked for years. I taught wonderful students. But they all go out as graduates and become, environmental assessment people that are actually assessing the decline of the very thing that they're interested in, the vitality of the earth. So our words have become used and abused. The world's changing so rapidly that our language has been unable to keep up with these changes. So our languages all over the world, many of them quite ancient, have never gone through a period of such rapid transformation of the culture within which they need to be expressed. The novelty of new ones is to challenge the status quo, and also to give us a wider, more expansive view of what we could do. So the philosopher Wittgenstein famously said, "The limits of my language are the limits of my world." Well, I want to break open those limits, and I'm hoping some of the language I create actually opens up a space in this world that is being closed off from us. And so that's there's also, I guess, the element of fun, which is that I like challenging people in a way that's non-confrontational, and language is a good way to do that. It's like throwing flowers at people is, being a peacenik. Well, I throw concepts. Well, they don't hurt anyone. All they do is cause people to think. Well, that's the aim of what I'm trying to do. And so by using this conceptual framework, and it's evolving all the time, I'm desperately trying to get us out of a mess that we're in, where more facts, more science doesn't seem to be cutting it. Maybe our emotional base as humans, deeply embedded genetically and evolutionary in life, good old E.O. Wilson was right that there is a kind of instinct, biophilic, life-affirming, life-loving in all of us. How in the hell did that get taken out of us? How did, I call it muicide, the extinction of our emotions. How on earth did we get on that path? And so the linguistic attempt is not a sophisticated philosophy of language. It's a provocation. It's drama. It may even be described as marketing.
Right. Yeah, well, actually, if we speak about marketing, you actually use this word sustainability that is quite often, I think, used in practices that we may not value as sustainable at all. So aren't you afraid then that new words you invent may have the same faith in that regard?
I think there's more content in symbiosis than, say, eco-hyphen, which goes on top of everything. So it's the spray-on solution to every problem that we have. If we've got a problem, put eco in front of it. Oh, I suddenly feel better because it's got eco there. What's an ecosystem? Well, there's nothing. There's no definition of what it is. Unless you give it content and put lines around it, it doesn't exist. So what we're using is a conceptual framework which is entirely useless for the purpose that we want it to be used for. So eco becomes ecosystem. Ecosystem becomes bounded. Bounded becomes carbon credits. Boundaries become market mechanisms for offsets. And all of a sudden, eco means business as usual. Right. And so we have to become aware of just how powerful language is in keeping us silent, keeping us quiet, keeping us ignorant. Eco-agnosy, that's the one use of eco that I've created myself. Agnosy is technically a synonym for ignorance. Right. So it's not an insult, it's a factual statement.
Yes. So if I understand you, we need to have new words, but we also need to keep on scrutinizing who is using the words, maybe? And
the corruption of language goes on all the time. There's a Indian company that builds handmade fountain pens, and they've called their most expensive fountain pen the Symbiocene pen. And I thought, I'll take them on. I wrote to them. Their CEO got back to me and said, Dr. Albrecht, I could just imagine the head waggling. We've created a pen that will last 300 years. We hope that you'll be able to write with it in the Symbiocene. And I thought that's a pretty good answer. So permanence must be part of Symbiocene thinking. But there are other examples where there's no such justification. But I'm on the alert for that. But the difference between eco, sustainable, resilience, etc., is that symbiosis has content and is backed up by science. Sustain what? For how long? Resilient. We've got more perverse resilience on the planet than we have actual resilience. Things that should go away are still here. It's like a bad smell in the room. We just want it to go, but it's hanging around. So that's how language works. Resilience is actually perverse resilience. It's the opposite of what we want it to be. And so the language game, if you like, another Wittgensteinian term, the language game needs to be understood, picked apart, and used as criticism against those that we think are on the wrong track. So if we are failing in our science to convince, despite the Great Barrier Reef, as we are speaking, virtually collapsing and dying, over 70% of it's bleached in the last week. The whole of the southern hemisphere has had coral bleaching. It's the first time it's ever happened. And so these problems are huge. They're being addressed by science. We're being assailed by the facts, but nothing changes. And so I want language and the emotions to be another way of trying to get change, and not just little change, bloody big change, mate, real big change.
And obviously you're speaking of a we a few times. I was wondering, who is your ideal reader? Who is you in this regard?
I haven't got a clue. It's a really good question.
Who should have these new emotions and know about these new vocabularies?
It's probably the half of the world that lives in cities and urban complexes, not the other half. So the we, it's not all humans, because, there are many indigenous cultures struggling to survive on the planet. There's virtually no isolated indigenous population. I think that disappeared in the 1970s or something, when the last Amazonian tribe was firing arrows at helicopters that were invading their space. So the we is selective. It's not all humans, and it's certainly important that I point out that it's not all humans. So yes, it needs to be very carefully defined as to who it is that we're speaking about. It's like the exhibition that features a huge mirror, and the sign on it says the world's most dangerous animal. So when you stand in front of the mirror, you become the world's most dangerous animal. However, some little kid from the slums of New York standing in front of that mirror, looking at the mirror was actually put up at the Bronx Zoo in many decades ago. They're not responsible for what's going on. And so it reminded me when I read that story that you always have to be very careful about the we, and I'm pleased that you pointed it out.
And then the you, so who would you like to learn about these new words and maybe also bring about action because of that knowledge?
Look, the Symbiocene is such a large concept, I call it a mega meme, that it's everyone. And it should be part of the education of children. And symbiosis should be depicted in our novels. We're really good at writing about the dystopia that's a characteristic of our current era. but it's really hard to write about the opposite and get it to sell. So my audience is to try and convince people that the joy of life, the happiness that we would experience as a life form, the creativity, the work, the meaning, the purpose of life is actually embedded in this idea of the Symbiocene. And so my audience is everybody on Earth. I'm not shy about that. I mean, I think we've got to get to 25% of the population to make a difference. I'm pretty sure you guys are part of that 25%, but I have no idea how to get any further. All I know is that I need help.
Right. Okay. And then maybe you're also saying, you skipped that a bit because I was very strict on time, right. But you write about spirituality, and you also had a slide on that, and I found that super fascinating in the book. And I reckon some of us here may identify as secular, some may as religious. So in what ways does your spirituality can speak to all of these different human beings who have different worldviews? And is it also a necessary aspect of the road to the Symbiocene, your secular spirituality?
Well, I guess it's the idea that past spirituality, particularly institutionalized religion, has separated humans from the rest of life, and it's a story that's well told. Lynn White Jr. and other academics have really carefully explained how our religious traditions in the Western context have separated humans from the rest of life. This has profound implications in the evolution of history, and the Protestant work ethic, capitalism, and all the rest of it becomes part of a story of the Anthropocene and its ascendancy. However, the UT area that I explained briefly is a moment in my life where I feel that my life is merged with the rest of life. I feel indistinguishable from the birds, the forest, the ocean, or whatever it is that I'm in. I'm in a kind of dreamlike state, but I'm not taking drugs. It's the real thing, and so. I think the idea of a spirituality that's secular, that's built around symbiosis, satisfies a need in humans to have this connection, the search for meaning, which is what spirituality is often defined as. This search for meaning is important for us, but we've been looking for it in the wrong place. The big tree, the big church, the big man, the big everything. In Australia, we've even got the big pineapple up in Queensland. It's part of our idea that everything has to be really big for it to be important. So I want to go in the opposite direction. I want to find the smallest possible things, even if we can't see them. In the past, we had a symbolic appreciation of that which was unknown or unseeable. Now we have to switch from the invisible to the visible and begin to understand that our spiritual connection is, in fact, I call it the Geist, Geds, and the German Geist. Geds idea, it's an ancient Indo-European root word for words like together or gather or good. So that g sound in good is where the Ged comes from. So a good earth feeling, UT area, but in a spiritual context, is my contribution to saying that we all have this spiritual need. Our existing departments of spirituality are kind of bankrupt. So let's try something new. So I'm not sure if this will work, but why not try?
Right. And I can see that, and I also very much see the attraction of this new spirituality. I would say that there might be people who will not, for whom spirituality may be, not something they naturally, tend to or want to go to. And I guess one can maybe generally say the same about newness, right? That the new, also when it is about words, new words can scare people off. Mm-hmm. How would you, all this newness, is that not scary, and might that not be?
Look, I don't think it's as scary as the pandemic of depression that we have worldwide, particularly in young people. what's really scary is the lack of any kind of constructive, creative spirituality or whatever else you want to call it. So the alternative, not let's stick with what we know, what we're familiar with, let's stick with the old. I mean, that's the Anthropocene disaster unfolding before us, and we're seeing the results of it. The psychoterratic is strongly in the negative. It's getting worse. So what can we do to turn this, the big ship, the SS Anthropocene, around, or steer it into an iceberg so we get rid of it real fast? Right. So the alternative is unthinkable as far as I'm concerned. The new it's there to shock, it's there to be noticed, it's there to provoke, and deliberately so. And the more provocative it is, the less likely it is to be ignored.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. Yes.
Okay.
And then, because now it becomes maybe a bit political what we're talking about, and there's also an interesting concept there I think you use, which is soliphilia instead of solidarity. Mm-hmm. So I think solidarity is a lovely word. Just
so
generally.
Do I. Yeah.
So why do we need soliphilia? What is different there?
The language needs to be separated from the old left-right political divide, because these things are human issues. They're not defined or owned by political ideology. So soliphilia, working together to achieve a common end, is something that I thought would be a useful contribution to the alleviation of solastalgia. So, for example, as an academic activist, I work with communities in the Land and Environment Court in New South Wales in order to bring about a cessation of coal mining, the cause of their solastalgia, and we won. And it was a diverse group of people, farmers, retired academics, lawyers, and a bewildering Indigenous people, a bewildering array of different people whose political allegiances were overridden by the fact that they had one common thing in common, which is that their lives were being made miserable, their lands were being destroyed by a common enemy. I don't like the language of war, but let's just call it a common source. And so this idea of a politics which is separate from past ideology appealed to me, but really that's what the Symbiocene is as well. It takes that idea one step further. It's a non-political concept. It can't be owned by the left or the right. It can only be owned by people of goodwill who are interested in life and its continuity. And that's not something that politics can or should ever own. And so I want my concepts to appeal to people irrespective of their current political commitments, because I think they all have a common interest in life. If not, they're terraforans, and we need to defeat them conceptually in any way we can.
Yes, I can see that. Just to maybe ask one question about this more, I think there are concepts such as endemophilia, so the love of one's near surroundings.
Yes, and that which is unique to your surroundings.
Right.
And also as part of your phenology, the patterns and rhythms of life. So if you live in an area and certain species of orchid appears in spring every year, that's a sign that all is good. Mm. And so your endemophilia has expectations, it fits patterns, it fits how your joy in living is satisfied. If the orchid doesn't come up because you've had acid rain or some other horrible thing has happened, then that's the solastalgia, that's the dread. All of the negatives begin to emerge.
Right.
So endemophilia is that which is closest to you, which you hold very dearly to your heart. And when it's violated, you feel violated.
Right. Yeah, so what I wanted to ask you about that, and you write a bit about it in the book, that this, I guess, implies a sort of focus on the local. And I was wondering, how do you protect such a concept or such an idea also from possibly a conservative takeover that is already happening? There's quite some, I guess, right-wing or radical right-wing conservationist discourse about our own country that has to be closed off, this closed borders kind of rhetoric.
Yep.
So how does that locality relate to also maybe a global intuition and global, indeed, solophilia, to speak
Right.
with that?
Look, I've tried to emphasise in the brief time that I've had that we need to go from gigantism to the smaller. We come from the smaller, we've ignored it, we didn't know about it, and now we need to. So, the Gaian scale, the planetary scale, is there, but it's not the direction we need to go in to understand how we can reconnect with life. We've got to go from the micro to the macro, and that means the building of viable places at localities on Earth that all have different characteristics, that all have different soils, different species. And so I hate the idea of Mook world where everything becomes the same, the homogeneity of globalization. And so we do need to, with a big neon light warning about that these ideas can be taken too far, that genocide could be the result of excessive love of your own place and country. I mean, we understand that with respect to the rise of the Third Reich. They were nature lovers, but not of the sort that we would wish to be associated with in the 21st century, besides which they lost. So there's an important point here, which is that the way in which we are evolving, the way in which at the moment gigantism is the rule, is destroying what I call, or what the French called terroir, the unique aspects of place that enable food and wine to have distinctive flavours, distinctive aromas, I mean, the word agriculture has culture in it, so obviously there's a culture connected to that particular way of life. So I'm a terroirist, I love the idea of being a champion of the distinctively local, the distinctively regional. But in the 21st century, that now involves migration, it now involves multiculturalism, it now involves unity and diversity, which we didn't have to think about in the past. So that invites environmental education, it invites a whole suite of things that we need to do in addition to just living the way we used to 300 years ago. I'm afraid if your farmers are now destroying the planet, destroying the soil, destroying the groundwater, they're terraformers, they're not farmers.
All right, thank you for that. Maybe one last question, then I would like to open up to you, because you might have noticed that this is quite a different country than Australia is.
Yeah, it's very flat.
And in the book you write a lot about experiences of wilderness, for instance that feeling of euteria. I think you refer then to surfers riding their waves, feeling one, and then I'm like, what is here happening? How can we have these emotions too? So I think in the Netherlands there's no such thing really as pristine wilderness. I'm not saying this is necessarily negative, but everything has, I think, a human touch. So yeah, is your vocabulary and also the things they refer to, is it applicable here, or do we need to tweak it a bit?
Probably not. I think if you can really attend to a square metre of Holland, it will contain millions, if not trillions, of things that you can pay attention to. So one plant coming up in the crack in the concrete is enough for me. So I don't need 1 million hectares of World Heritage National Park to experience euteria. So in other words, scale is important, and maybe the big picture, the awe and the wonder that you have when you're standing at the Grand Canyon or the World Heritage National Parks that I have close to me where I live now. But you don't need that. What you do need is to pay attention, minute, detailed attention to what's in front of you. And so my experiences of euteria can be had in a campus not far from here with a freeway right next to it, and I'm paying attention to the birds. I'm looking at the bud, the blossom and the fruit, as Hegel described it. It's spring, and there's stuff happening with, if you pay attention to it, it's like Miriam, the metamorphosis is there in front of you to watch and see. Now, if you pay attention, that's better than YouTube. It's life unfolding in front of you. It's endlessly fascinating. It never stops. It's never boring. Well, you know, and it's free. It's a bit like the Symbiocene. It's free. You don't have to pay for it. So that, to me, is a far more sane and rational option than its opposite.
Right. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Yes, then it's time for you to join in the conversation. And I asked this question about people's symbiocracies just before. I don't know if anyone wants to share their thoughts about it. If not, also feel free to formulate your own question to Professor Albrecht. I see one question over here, and we have a mic coming, so all the people who are watching the live stream will be able to listen to us still.
Thank you. Yeah, I was reading the book, and in the beginning you were talking about radical optimism.
Yep.
And I would like to hear some more about it. Why should it be radical? And can you give me some examples, maybe?
Jonathan Lear, the American philosopher, wrote a wonderful book called Radical Hope, which is about the impact of colonization on indigenous people in North America. Radical hope was a hope that you have about the future without really knowing what its content was. So there was a leap of faith in that language. After that, I used to think that radical hope was a really good way of thinking about the future, and I'm indebted to Jonathan Lear for that message. But then we got hopium, and the criticism of hope became like another pandemic in language. So hopium became a kind of insult, that everything that looked as though it was future orientated was just either utopian or hopium. So I changed it from radical hope to radical anticipation. And so that's the concept that I would like to be using now, anticipation of a future that you want to be in, and so much so that you're impatient. You actually want to move from where you are now to that future state as rapidly, as creatively, as intelligently, as physically busy as possible. And so that's the way that my thinking has gone now. So I have to be careful, because I think the radicals in our society are those that are destroying it. The conservatives are those that want the Symbiocene. So language gets inverted and perverted. So yeah, it's a really radical idea to render ourselves extinct. It's not radical to think that we should be creating a Symbiocene where we can live in relative harmony with each other and in relative harmony with other living beings. It's not radical to think that we should have our children and grandchildren enter such a world where they can satisfy and be truly human. So language is important. So radical anticipation, if you can come up with a better one, I take my hat off to you. But that's where I am at the moment. I do keep changing. I'm not fixed in the way I wish to describe these things. So I'm uneasy about the word radical, but I'm bloody impatient. My anticipation is becoming intense. I just had my 71st birthday. I ordered my mycelium coffin. I'm getting quite agitated about the fact that this thing is not moving fast enough. So I hope you understand my point.
Thank you. We have another question over there.
I think my question follows on your question about the difference in country, and that you need to have an awe experience, but maybe you don't. And I think I agree with you that the small things can spark that feeling of love for nature and one with nature. But I'm sort of wondering more practically, how can we, do you think, stimulate that feeling with people who live in an urban environment, maybe like don't even have a garden, like most people in cities do not have that interaction with nature. Even though it is a small flower, I don't think it will stimulate with them that feeling. So how could you, in such a situation?
Well, I've got some pretty wild ideas for that one. I mean, for a start, most of the functions that we perform in cities and urban areas are anti-life. So like when we go to the loo, and do our stuff. We press the button, it goes away. Well, what if we had a bacterial colony in the walls of our house that requires large amounts of nitrogen to produce electricity? So every time you go for a piss, you're actually enabling your lights to go on in your house. So in other words, you reanimate the relationship between humans and technology. Everything you do can be integrated into supporting life, even if you don't have a rainforest next door. So we have to accept the fact that we are now solidly alienated from life and life forms in cities. We can, do the sort of, let's stick a few plants on the side of a building. I don't think most people are convinced by that. But if we can begin to think of technologies that require our active participation in the creation and perpetuation of life, then we might be able to use the way we live now to convey exactly the same message as if you were walking into the rainforest in Costa Rica. We can do it in a digital way as well. I mean, it's not as if we've got no options for city and urban-based people using the digital world to simulate or stimulate their interest in life and lifelike forms. Films like Avatar do it, and internationally famous and box office bestsellers. So, I'm not into that field myself, but I can see that it's better than nothing. We don't feed our bacteria to turn on the lights yet, but if we want to decolonize fully, we're going to have to stop lithium mining. We're going to have to stop rare earth mining. We're going to have to start thinking about how can we produce the energy that we need from our own local and regional resources. And one of the greatest sources of energy is our own body. And so our lights will shine like fireflies in the Symbiocene. Our bacteria will be fed by our urine. Our furniture will be made from algae that was produced in our own little algae digester. They do what they want to do. We take their end product and turn it into our lounge room and sit in it. And these things already exist. And so mycelium, biotechnologies, I call them symbiotechnologies because they're going to have to be reconnecting us to the patterns and rhythms of life. So that reconnection is a vision of the future. It's exemplified already by, we are already creating furniture using algae-based substrates. We are already using mycelium to build bricks, houses, and all the rest of it. We already can produce electricity from bacteria using nutrients like rich nitrogen-rich sources. But at the moment, they could probably run a small LED light. They can't power a whole city. But that's the direction that the technology can go in. But importantly, it's the emotion that shifts that enables people to have the insight, the intelligence, and the energy to move in that direction. And I forgot to mention that during my presentation, that the Anthropocene exemplifies the very worst aspects of human lack of intelligence. We explode things, we burn them, and then we use that energy to turn wheels. Well, that's about as dumb a thing as I could possibly imagine, especially when it destroys the climate and destroys the ecosystem, So Homo sapien has to use intelligence that we haven't really tapped into yet, that we haven't really exerted ourselves as yet. So this intelligence and the emotional power behind it is the promise of the Symbiocene, and it's the opposite of the dumbassness of the Anthropocene. So I'm challenging you to actually become Homo sapiens.
Thanks. Maybe two more questions. Yeah, I see two in the back, really. One behind the pillar and one over there in the middle. And there's drinks afterwards, so we have plenty of time to speak some more together after that.
Well, I was wondering what...
I see you. Yeah.
I was wondering what your position is on nuclear energy.
It would be a good thing if it's not so dangerous, you know. Well, you know, it's the old safe fail versus fail safe. When things go wrong with it, they go catastrophically wrong and impact on the whole planet and the viability of life. So there's no margin for error, because when something goes wrong, it's a catastrophe. And we've got plenty of examples that we could discuss, most recently in Japan. Safe fail means that when something goes wrong, there's no particular damage done that's exponentially nasty. And so if a wind turbine fails, it's an economic loss, but it's not a catastrophe for life. So it's pretty much that warns me and steers me away from nuclear energy. Also, it's the most expensive form of energy that I can imagine on the planet, and at the moment the alternative energy sources are far cheaper, they're far safer, and they're being developed at a speed which is not sufficient to steer us away from really seriously increasing CO2 levels in the atmosphere and having lag effects into the future. So, it's a wonderful idea to have the sun in our neighbourhood, a nuclear fusion reactor. We've got one already. We may as well use it. It's far enough away that it's not going to do anything much to us except give us sunburn or a melanoma, which is serious. But for Fukushima to blow up in your neighbourhood is not good news. And we've seen exactly what happens when things go wrong. And you can't say that, we can build them so that earthquakes won't bother you. Well, we had the first earthquake ever in the Blue Mountains the other day. Fault lines, things go wrong. Anthropogenic earthquakes. We're now seeing more of them in the gas fields of Australia, where places that have never had earthquakes before are now getting them because we've fracked the earth. We've fracked it without even thinking about the microbiome of the earth. And so the safe, just forms of renewable energy are a no-brainer. I would love it if nuclear energy could be guaranteed safe, but there is no such guarantee, so I oppose it.
Right. We go on to our last question, and maybe the response can be slightly small because we need enough time to buy the book and have a drink. Over there. Yeah, in the back, in the middle. Yeah, you.
Hi there. My question is twofold. It's short. If you fast forward to the Symbiocene, will we still be using raw materials like any metals or chemicals? And two, if not, what would be the impact on modern inventions like aviation, telecommunications, and computers?
Look, it's a really good question, and the fast answer is I haven't got a clue, because I'm not an engineer. I'm a bloody philosopher, mate. So the issue is that the challenge is seriously to engineers, techno people, that these things at the moment look impossible to replace. But I think the replacement economy is a huge challenge. So we're beginning to replace concrete and steel with mycelium and cellulose. Now that's the start. The promise of a lighting and power using living systems to generate the kinds of energy that we need is future orientated, but I know there's already kind of breakthrough research on that. So I would like that to continue. At the moment we're subsidising fossil fuels. Our universities are perpetuating the system that is innovating our demise. So what I would like to see is a rapid and overtly political shift of our resources to the innovators, to the the research that's needed to get us to those points where we can replace heavy metals with their benign alternatives. I can't possibly imagine a Symbiocene that's replaced, carcinogenic substances that we're using today. But I have to think that it's possible, and that I have to think that Homo sapiens, the wise, intelligent ape, is up to the challenge. But my challenge to you and to all young people who are in a position to shape and create the future is to go in the direction of the Symbiocene and have it as a goal, even if it looks unlikely or impossible. But it may, at the final moment, be an ethical issue which says, well, if it's toxic and we can't get rid of it from the things that we use, we either ethically deliberately stop using it, or we make an ethical decision that it's impossible not to. But that is a social, ethical decision that has to be made by a symbiocracy, something which is thinking about something other than humans, demos, of the people. Well, the symbiocracy is rule for the earth, by the earth, for the earth.
Yeah, wow, I think that's lovely. Yeah, that needs an applause, I agree. Yes. I think on that note we can end. As I said, there's drinks over there. There's Atheneum Boekhandel, who is selling both the English and the Dutch version of this book. We just applaud, but I think we need a second one, because thank you so much, Glenn Albrecht, for sharing your thoughts with us.